The Middle Ages conjure up images of knights, imposing castles and majestic cathedrals. But everyday life was very different and often much less romantic. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel if you like these videos and leave a like. Now let's start. Medieval castles and ancient cities appear to us today as fairy tale and romantic places. But the reality of the time was anything but fascinating. They were dirty, chaotic, and often pestilential environments. The streets were literally submerged by all kinds of waste. Food scraps, animal and human excrement, household and craft waste accumulated everywhere, especially during the summer months, making the air unbreathable. The richer citizens, when possible, abandoned the cities to take refuge in their rural residences, trying to escape the unbearable stench that stagnated within the walls. Public hygiene was extremely poor, especially when compared to the standards of classical antiquity. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, much of the advanced sanitation infrastructure was lost, and medieval cities fell into a decline from which they only began to recover at the dawn of the modern age. Suffice it to say that an individual produced about half a kilo of solid excrement and 1 to 3 liters of urine every day. In a city of 3,000 inhabitants, this meant over 500 tons of feces and tens of thousands of liters of urine per year. Much of this ended up in the streets, ditches and waterways, contaminating wells and drinking water sources. Epidemics of dysentery, typhus and other intestinal diseases were frequent, even though, at the time, the true causes were ignored. It was thought that the disease spread through bad smells, the so-called miasma. Effective solutions were rare, and medieval cities faced the far from symbolic risk of being submerged by their own waste on a daily basis. And in some cases, this actually happened. In 1844, in Erfurt, Germany, during a meeting of nobles, the rotten floor of one hall gave way, and dozens of people fell into a latrine below, drowning in the sewage. The event went down in history as the Erfurt bath catastrophe. This was the price to pay in a world without modern sewers. And someone had to do the cleaning. There were no magic toilets. The hardest and most unpleasant work was done by real people. In urban centers, castles and monasteries, there were real invisible heroes, or perhaps it is better to say wretches, who were responsible for emptying septic tanks and cleaning toilets. But before talking about the toiletari, as they were called, it is important to understand the context in which they operated. Medieval cities grew in a disorderly manner without sanitary planning. The management of public space was neglected, and the sewers, where they existed, were mostly uncovered ditches along the streets. Each house made do as it could, and more often, discharged everything directly into the street. A saying of the time was that the pavement of the city was made of rubbish, and it was not far from the truth. The streets were progressively raised, layer after layer, of compacted waste. Only from the 10th century, with the spread of stone houses and paving, did people begin to take the matter more seriously. The first municipal regulations were born. In Prague in 1407, it was forbidden to throw the contents of chamber pots out of windows. But such laws were often ignored. However, over time, waste pits began to spread, especially among the wealthier families. In the courtyards, latrines were dug, reinforced with wooden beams or barrels, often 8 to 10 meters deep. In the case of castles, the previto was invented, a protruding niche in the masonry that emptied directly into the moat. In river cities, drains were built above the watercourses, so that the waste was carried away by the current. But even the best pits filled up, and then a problem arose: where to put all that content. This is where the toiletari came in, specialists in the removal of human waste. It was certainly not a sought-after profession. It was often imposed on the poorest, on the condemned, or, paradoxically, on the executioners and their assistants. In many cities, it was the executioner's family who took care of public hygiene, along with the removal of carcasses and stray animals. Over time, real groups of specialized workers emerged. In England, they were known as gong farmers, literally latrine farmers, and they worked exclusively at night. Men of the night. Precisely, who roamed the city with carts and tubs, loading excrement to take outside the walls. They lived on the margins, both physically and socially. The smell made them unwanted wherever they went. A medieval document mentions Franco of Via della Capra in Berno, known in the 10th century as Quatfura, that is, exporter of feces. In some cases, these people earned good money. It is said that gong farmers could earn in one night as much as a craftsman in a week. But how did this work actually work? At night, the toiletari literally lowered themselves into the pits. With buckets, shovels, and long sticks, they collected the contents and passed them to their companions, who loaded them onto carts. They often worked waist-deep in smelly sewage, in narrow, slippery, dark spaces. Ventilation was poor, and the risk of being stunned by toxic gases, methane, ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, was very high. Tragedies did not fail to strike. In 1326, a certain Richard Raker, a latrine cleaner by trade, drowned in his own. The floor gave way beneath him, and he fell into the pit. An ironic fate for someone who had spent his life emptying other people's toilets. Toilet workers were exposed to infections, skin diseases, respiratory problems, and intestinal disorders on a daily basis. Even a simple wound could become fatal in an environment saturated with bacteria. And then there was the smell. Impossible to eliminate, it permeated their skin and clothes, making them socially undesirable. They were shunned, isolated, discriminated against. Yet, without them, cities would have collapsed under the weight of their own excrement. The toilet workers made urban life possible while remaining on the margins of society. Some were well paid, others worked for pennies or to avoid worse punishments. But everywhere and always, they were considered impure and unworthy, forced to live in separate quarters and wear distinctive clothing. A company that ran on their work, but treated them as if they didn't exist. The figure of the medieval toiletaro, although it remained hidden for a long time in the darkest folds of social history, represents an essential piece to understanding the daily life of the cities of the Middle Ages. In an urban context, characterized by extremely precarious hygienic sanitary conditions, the activity of these workers, often carried out in dangerous conditions at night and completely unprotected, it was essential to guarantee a minimum level of public health. Despite this, the toiletaro was marginalized stigmatized, and relegated to the margins of the social ladder, in a paradox that accompanies many of the most humble, but at the same time, fundamental professions. Studying their condition allows us not only to reflect on the past, but also to question the present. There still exist today invisible professions to which we entrust the silent functioning of our society without fully recognizing their value. The history of medieval toilets reminds us that every era, including our own, is based on the daily and silent work of men and women who are often forgotten, but who perform vital functions for the collective well-being. Ultimately, rediscovering and analyzing the figure of the medieval toiletaro means doing justice to those who, despite operating in the shadows and amidst general indifference, contributed decisively to shaping the conditions of urban life and to laying the foundations, albeit distant, of modern public health. That's all for today, and what do you think of this story? Let me know in the comments. Your opinion is very important to me to support the channel. I hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time. Bye.